Well, okay, welcome to our hustings. So this is the first time that we're running an event like that, but in the kind of spirit of increased transparency and democracy, both in Cambridge and within the union, we thought it would be a really good idea to ask you all to come and explain to us a little bit about why you're standing for this council position. So I think in the first instance, we asked you to just say a few words, each of you, about why you're standing for election for University Council, and then following on, we can take some questions. So, Phil.
Okay, sure. We'll start with this. My name's Philip Knox. I'm a university lecturer in the Faculty of English. I was a fellow of Trinity College for 3 years, but I resigned my fellowship in protest over their decision to withdraw from the USS pension scheme. And I work in my research on medieval literature. I'm really glad that you've come along today. I think this is a time when we have to try and exercise democracy and democratise the university as much as possible. And I'm very conscious of the fact that I'm standing here because someone's place has been vacated due to a contraction of democracy on the University Council, with postdocs no longer being represented, Sam Ainsworth no longer having his seat on council. So I hope that we can continue to expand democracy across the university. I've outlined 3 main areas in my statement that matter to me and that I'd like to contribute to in some way on University Council. The first of those is casualisation. I really think we need to support postdoc researchers, graduate supervisors, and everyone on fixed-term contracts, and in many cases on no contracts at all. A huge amount of labour is done in this institution for people with very little support, and a great deal of effort needs to be done to improve the working lives of these people for the sake of them, for their dignity and the respect that we owe them in the first instance, but also I think for the sake of the university and for our future as an institution. The other main area that I've outlined, and in which much of my own work has fallen into in the Faculty of English, is widening participation, access and outreach. I've done a lot of work in this area. I'm currently the English Faculty's Access and Outreach Officer, and while it existed, I sat on the university's Outreach Steering Group. We're living in a time when the landscape for fair access to higher education is changing. The Office for Students is calling for new and more stringent targets. In many ways, this is to be welcomed, and the university has just signed up to some very ambitious targets for 2024 to 25 in the Access and Participation Plan. And I think that's great and to be really embraced. However, I think we need to do much more to talk about other things that are affecting the landscape of fair access to higher education, such as spiralling student debt, the slow degradation of the humanities subjects in secondary education, and also things like the closure of public libraries and the access to knowledge that can happen for less advantaged people across the country. So I think our conversation about getting people into university has to be much wider, and we have to do more to lobby and speak out publicly about this. The final thing that I talk about in my statement, and the final area that is one of my priorities, is the climate emergency. And it seems to me that we must act on this decisively now. We have to think what it means to act on this at every level of the university's practices, what it means to act on this not only in terms of our research, but also in terms of the university's work as a landowner and as a developer. We have to think what it means to act in this way when the university is an enormous shareholder, what we do with our investments and how we have a conversation about where they're best placed. And it seems to me a massive priority to just get our funding out of fossil fuel companies as soon as we can. That seems to me an unanswerable argument. And we need, I think, to do this because we will be increasingly held to account by students whose futures are stretching ever further into the future and who are going to be ever more deeply affected by the climate crisis. So thank you for listening and thank you for participating in this small area of university democracy, and I'd be happy to answer any questions that you might have.
Thank you, Phil. So I'll hand it over to Simon.
Yeah. Thank you. Thank you so much for everyone who came along, and to UCU for organising this event. I think when I reflect upon the fact that there are already staff and students who are gearing up politically for the Cambridge City Council elections, which won't be held until May, when you compare the City Council with the University Council, I think given the power that the university has in this area, it's quite shocking how little attention is paid to our internal democracy and what goes on in there. And so I'm really glad that we're able to have this hustings and we're able to get out there, and I hope that we can build a much more engaged, much more active democratic movement within the university. So why am I standing? Primarily because I was asked to stand by a postdoc friend and colleague who's doing amazing work on sustainable finance, and who said that she felt that my voice was one that would be needed on council, given the really important work that the university needs to undertake to be a leader in response to the climate emergency, and just how important that is for the future of this institution, for the future of this country, and for the future of the world. And I took a bit of persuading, because while I've been politically active and environmentally active all my life, I have, like many of you, I think, found the university's processes to seem very outdated, very fusty, very undemocratic, and what difference could I make? But I reflected on two things when I decided that no, actually I would step out a bit from my desire to focus on my research and my academic work and actually try and get involved and seek this nomination. So the first of these is just how frustrated I get that the university does not recognize, engage with, or act up to its own power and resources. This is a very, very wealthy institution. It's a very privileged institution. It has a lot of access. It's a very elite institution, and it has a huge amount of expertise and knowledge. You know, the University of Cambridge is one of the most powerful institutions in the country, and yet so often it acts as if we're just a bunch of academics who should be left alone to do what we want to do. Now, I know that people high up in the university, you know, traditionally feel very defensive about being told how to spend their money or how to make decisions. But I think that the time has really come when accepting its power and acting responsibly with that power is now absolutely in this university's interests. We need to change people's perceptions of the university, but we also really need to take a lead in progressive, environmentally friendly action. We are very close to sea level here. This university has been around for 800 years. We will not be able to stay around for 800 years if the current climate emergency continues unabated. This is a huge threat to the university. The other thing that really motivated me was what I can't help but see as a growing democratic crisis within the institution, just at the time when we need more democracy and more openness and more transparency. And I saw this first with the Regent House grace on divestment, which I signed and which I submitted evidence to at the town hall meeting, and that was passed. And that made very clear recommendations to the university, which the council then ignored. And I still find that shocking, because that was not meant to happen. That was not what is written into the statutes and governance of this institution. We are meant to respect the rule of law, but the council felt empowered to make its own decision and to push the ball, to kick the can further down the road. And I don't want to see that happen. And then we saw the many people disenfranchised from the Regent House, including as was hearing the last person to hold this position. And I have colleagues and friends who think they're still in the Regent's House, who haven't realized that they've been disenfranchised. And this is sad, because so many of these people are the voices, are the campaigning activists, the spirits, the people with the ideas and the knowledge to help us get through this situation. So if you vote for me, what I really want to say is I'm not just going to be a vote. I'm not just going to support the motions that you want, but I really want to be a voice. It is clear to me that council is not listening, and if anything, is trying to turn the volume down on those people who are calling for the university to wake up to the situation it's in. I'm a very persuasive voice. I'm a very intelligent voice. I'm a very empathetic voice. I'm very good at speaking to different audiences. I think I can break through, and I would love that opportunity to represent you on council and to break through to those people who aren't listening and who need to hear. Thank you.
Thank you very much. And now Matthew.
Thank you very much for both of those speeches. I'm going to take a different tactic. First, I'll introduce myself. My name is Matthew Danish. I'm an early career researcher. I'm a research associate at the Department for Computer Science and Technology. And I came here to talk about how do you get to see the change that you want to see in the world. Because that's something I've struggled with for the last, decade, actually, in many different contexts. And I want to tell you a little story about 8 years ago, when I was a graduate student in 2012. In 1 year, 2 students and 1 postdoc were killed on the streets in front of the university property by sloppy truck drivers who weren't looking where they were going. They ran over them on their bikes. The city didn't care. Nobody was going to do anything. My friends and I got together, we organized, we talked to a lot of people, we rallied, we held events, we talked to the university president, we talked to the mayor, we talked to city officials, we talked to hundreds of people on the street. It took us 2 years. But eventually, the city came around, the city engineers came around and offered us a protected bike lane as an option. And I got to sit there and say, yes, that's the correct answer. We need this to protect people. And we got the change. And all the locations where the people were killed, they are all now completely different. It took a while, but they finally did it. When I moved to Cambridge in 2015, I thought I was moving to a place that was 800 years old, where nothing ever changes. And anyway, I'm a foreigner, so what could I do? Well, I couldn't have been more wrong. In fact, things change here all the time, if you get involved. And I was welcomed as a volunteer. I took part in many campaigns, and as some of you know, those changes will be written into the streets and places around the city in the coming years. There are so many issues that we face as a university. The climate emergency has to be solved, or else we don't have a future at all. And if we do somehow manage to survive that, then there's the ongoing issues of equity, of pay, of pensions. For example, why is it in 2020 that we still have a gender pay gap? If you look at the data, there's a pretty clear reason that needs to be solved. Career progression for early career researchers is very precarious. I should know, being one of them. The root cause is central government and the way research is funded. The university can speak with a very strong voice to help support people who don't have a lot of support. And the university can also set a great example worldwide about how to respond to the climate emergency. And that's why I'm getting involved. And I looked around at my department and at my friends and at my colleagues, and one of them is Dr. Sam Ainsworth, who has been disqualified from being on the council by virtue of the fact that he was only here for 2.5 years in November. And I looked around and I realized there's not many people left who can actually stand and take on these issues. And that's when I realized if I'm going to ask other people to do things or to try things, I need to do it also myself. And that's why I'm getting involved. Now, I'm happy to say that I look around on this stage and I see some really good candidates. So I think that whichever way you vote, the one message I want to leave you with going forward is please get involved. Get involved in campaigns. Get involved in making change happen. Nobody can do it by themselves. Nobody's perfect. It's okay to make mistakes. The most important thing is getting involved. And if you don't mind, I'd like to plug an upcoming opportunity. In exactly 1 week, there's a discussion in the Senate House, just across the street from here where we are. It's about sustainable transport and cycling. And I really hope that everyone will come along. Everyone in the community, in the university community is welcome. Please come along and join us and speak. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Matthew. Right, okay, so I'll hand the floor over now to questions from the audience. So who wants to go first? Okay. Got a mic?
So the three of you have touched on the issue of democracy. So I want to know a little bit more on that question. So for me, it's critical. So in particular, what do you think about the role of Regent House in the university and the recent changes that we have seen? There's going to be strategic decisions on that in council meetings here. And in general terms, how do you make the university decisions represent better the views of the members of the university, including students as well?
Okay, shall we just take turns? Shall we start at the end with you, Simon?
So try and keep it brief. Two things. The decision to reduce the franchise for Regent House needs to be reversed. We need to raise evidence on what its impact has been, on who's speaking, what voices are being heard, what decisions are being taken. We need to collect that data, report on that, and make a strong case for reversing it. Because I still think there's a lot of people in the university who, even though there was a vote which they were asked to participate in, and even though there were campaigns, just don't understand that this change has been made and just don't understand how big it is. And I think the window of opportunity for reversing this decision has not yet closed, so that's a key priority. But the other thing, as I was saying, is unfortunately the situation is now very clear that merely for Regent House to speak is not enough. That its views and its decisions need to have strong advocates for them on the council, people who can make the arguments afresh, people who can find out the ways of getting to and persuading the other members of council that these voices need to be heard. Sometimes these decisions need to be strengthened, that we can't just rely upon this route anymore where Regent House speaks and the university is going to listen. We need to have more people within the university with strong voices.
Thank you. Matthew.
Thank you for that question. It's an excellent one. And I have to say, democracy is a very important matter to me because I got involved in campaigns for political office when I lived in the United States, in Boston, for Elizabeth Warren for Senate, for example. I was a very, let's say, engaged volunteer for my neighborhood and my city, campaigning to get Elizabeth Warren into the Senate, and we succeeded. And that really changed my life and the way I look at things. And then I went on to volunteer for city councilors and mayors and things like that. So I got very involved when I was in the U.S. And when I came here, things changed because, again, I'm a foreigner, so I didn't get involved in political campaigns. I'm neutral. However, I do see very much the importance of getting people involved and of having the voice be heard. And when the vote came through in 2018 for changing the Regent House membership criteria, this hit very hard for me because what I saw was a good half of my colleagues or more losing their right to vote on university matters. And I campaigned against it, against the change. It was still, it wasn't enough, I understand. There are some genuine issues with the way Regent House is managed. There are some genuine issues with having 6,000 or so people in it. I understand that, but I think we can find a better solution. I think that when you have a very large democracy like that, in the past, the route has not been to take away the voting rights from people, but instead to find a better way of managing and having representatives that manage the process. So I think we need to look towards finding a way towards a representative democracy, or I'm certainly open to other ideas. But the current decision is not sustainable.
Thanks. Anton.
Thank you for that question. It seems to me that there is a very large democratic deficit in this institution, and that's despite the fact that we're very unusual in having something like the University Council in which people like me can run for it and potentially become members of. I think one problem is engagement. So one problem is trying to get people to turn up to things like this, to read the University Reporter and think about these issues. And I think that can only be achieved with more engaged council members speaking to colleagues, speaking to people across the university, listening to them and trying to bring those issues to the table in the University Council. I also think to a certain extent there are certain limitations to what the official and internal structures of the university can do democratically. I think it's great that QSU are represented on council, and perhaps we could have even more representation from QSU. But I also think that certain organisations outside the official structures of the university have a role to play in the democratisation of the university. And I'm thinking about the union, I'm thinking about student-led campaigns, and it's those organisations that can energise people and that can hold the central university bodies to account. And I think that's a really important process in how democracy works.
Okay, thanks. Any further questions from the audience? Yeah, Ewan. There's a mic. Yeah.
Are you on strike? Is you on strike?
Did you hear the question?
Yeah. Shall we? I
Yeah,
don't mind,
you
yes, I
have
can
a
go.
go
Yes, I'm on strike. I've got very cold hands today and was standing on the lawn outside Regent House a few hours ago, which was quite good fun. I think I should say, if I may, this wasn't your question, but I'd like to say something about why I am on strike rather than why I'm not on strike. I've participated in the 3 strikes we've had since 2018. It seems to me that there are really enormous problems facing higher education. We're facing it as staff members, students are facing it too. I think all of the issues that we've already talked about in some ways, things about the climate emergency, things about casualisation, all of these can slowly be addressed through collective organisation. And I think that we can begin to slightly adjust the priorities of the university if we ask them to treat their staff fairly, to represent their staff properly when it comes to pensions, when it comes to pay. And if that adjustment of priorities can happen, then maybe we can look at bigger questions and the next step forward in trying to have a better and a more supportive and a more positive institution that we work for.
Yeah, thank you very much for that question. I have not been engaging in teaching duties for the past 2 years because of this kind of issue. And I am doing my research. I have my deadlines. And unfortunately, because of the way the system is structured, if I don't submit to these deadlines, I could lose my funding and then I could get kicked out of the country because I'm on a Tier 2 visa. So I do as much as I can. And that's where I'm at.
I'm not on strike. I have made contributions to the UCU Fighting Fund, and I've made sure that in the institute that I work at, where I am an academic program manager, that we are not doing anything that might require staff, whether on strike or not, to cross pickets. We've cancelled and moved events and are being supportive. My reasons for not are one personal and one public. The personal one is that I am a Quaker, and Quakers have a strong testimony towards integrity, and that applies also to contracts. And when you have signed a contract, to not breaking that contract. And Quakers have always strongly supported social action, but this has always been an issue of difficulty when it comes to saying, I'm not going to keep my word, I'm not going to follow this contract that I've signed. And I've always felt that the reasons for, if I were to go out on strike, I need to have exceedingly good reasons, a very high bar. And for the time being, as a manager and as someone who's responsible for many staff who are not on strike, I do not feel I personally can take that decision, although I very much support those who do, and I'm aware that I will benefit from their action, even though I myself am not taking it.
Another question? Clément?
that's a question more focused on investment strategy of the university. Let me explain a little bit more. I'd like to have your thoughts and what you think is doable in council about that, about the following. Universities in this country have been changing very fast by the combination, that's my opinion, I tell you what I think is really a nurture problem. The combination of tuition fees, tripled 10 years ago, the removal of caps on the number of students per universities, which is an incentive to grow bigger with buildings, and the universities borrowing a huge amount of money and becoming really building company, almost like building company, building new campuses. So that's to me that's a monster trap we are into. Besides the sort of big borrowing they do, this money is precisely borrowed to fund like the US's fund. So it's you see, this is a vicious circle for us. So and I was disappointed that in 2018, I don't think anybody in council voted against the Northwest Cambridge development. So I'd like to have your opinion about it. Just to give a context, it's more now than $1 billion, it's probably 1.5 billion that has been thrown into this big building developments for the university. The main goal being to increase the number of students to cash their fees. I can't see no rationale.
Okay, thank you for that question. There's several things I could talk about here. The financial side and let's say the Northwest Cambridge side. So I'll do the second first. In Northwest Cambridge, I've followed very closely for the last 4 years. I considered moving there it's actually intended for people in my position. However, I decided not to because I've already established myself here and I wanted to leave it for people who are newcomers, because I still remember showing up here and not having a place to live for 10 days and trying to find anywhere. And I will say that there is genuinely a problem for new postdocs who come here and don't have a place to live and can't afford or have difficulty affording a place to live. I got fortunate, I found something. Many people get into worse situations. So there's definitely a need for something to be done. The delivery of Northwest Cambridge, I've watched over the last 4 years. Some things were done well, and some things were horribly screwed up. And I could go into an inordinate amount of detail about the cycling infrastructure, as Martin will know. But in terms of funding and finance, I know that, yes, it's gone over budget. We could talk a lot about how projects all across this country go over budget. Why is that? Why is it that contracting is such a difficult thing? And why is it that we can't make these predictions well? But what I will say is that with regard to funding, we're going to have to make some tough decisions. And somebody's going to be unhappy. And in order to make those tough decisions, we're going to need people in the Regent House, students, and organizations like UCU getting together and agreeing to support whatever decision is being made. So we're going to have to get together and talk about this openly and figure out what the compromise is. It's going to be tough, either way.
Thanks. Yeah.
Thanks. I agree that the university is going through a period of transition and we need to see it in that light, but I also think we need to take a bit of a longer term perspective. You know, the university was founded in 1209 by scholars fleeing from Oxford and looking for a community that felt safe and that they felt they could control, because things had got out of hand in Oxford. And I think that has always been a big part of the relationship between the university and the city, that the University of Cambridge controls large sections of Cambridge. It controls the land, it controls the economy, it controls the infrastructure, it controls the waterways. And now it's growing, and this is having a huge impact on the city as a whole. You know, we have a groundwater crisis. We have shrinking amounts of green space and new developments. It's not sustainable. It's not sustainable at any level. the university needs to have a vision of itself that is cut to its cloth, where we don't try and outgrow this community, where we remain within it and remain part of it. And we need to see the benefits that that will bring, not hiring more postdocs than there are houses for in the city and then wondering why, it's so hard for them to find places to live. Yeah, sure, it's cheap to hire postdocs, it's easy to hire postdocs, but you have to have a limit on it. One thing I would really like to see much better, and I was talking about comparing the University Council to the City Council, is we should have much better links between the university government structures and the city government structures. I have great contacts in the council and also in South Cambridgeshire District Council, and I'd really like to integrate, have better voices and better transition. At the moment there's a new local plan going up, and there's been a lot of concern that whatever people say, the same decisions will get taken. And I think a big part of that is when you look at the city deal, the £1.1 billion of investment, which is doing so much to stimulate growth in this area, the university is an equal part of it with the two councils and the mayor, but the university doesn't, local people don't get any say on that. So I think that there is a better, more sustainable future that can be had, but I think it's going to require a much wider view about how the university relates to, builds upon and works with our local communities and our local environments than the council has really been willing to undertake until now. And I think we need to make the case for that wider vision on council, and I think we need to open up the channels of communication between different groups to make that possible.
Phil?
Thank you for that question. On the issue of the university as a developer, first of all, we've already heard some, I think, really, really wonderful things about that from the other candidates. I think the university has to think very carefully about its role and the effects that it has as a developer. We heard from the Unison rep at the rally on Thursday last week about the fact that it's the university that's driving up house prices in Cambridge, is forcing staff to live further and further away from central Cambridge and make a polluting commute and a tiring and a stressful commute into town. And I think the university has to do more to think about that, and also to think about in a long-term way for all of its staff. The issue you raised about funding mechanisms, tuition fees and development projects, which I suppose might include other kinds of development projects, including the colleges, which are building lots of student housing for that reason and so on. It's not just a problem in Cambridge, it's a problem nationwide that the university funding model is broken, it seems to me. Since the trebling of tuition fees and the overall reduction of funding for universities, we're in really dire straits, and we haven't quite worked out what to do yet. I think the university needs to get a lot better at lobbying central government. The university needs to get a lot better at making its point publicly about the fact that many of the very difficult choices it faces are forced upon it by government policies that want to drive market forces into higher education. And I think we need to communicate that better, and we need to do what we can to resist it locally, rather than simply accepting it as the new status quo. And I think what that might mean is it might mean lobbying, speaking to the press, having a more united statement and a more robust statement against some of these forces that are bringing this situation about that you describe.
Thank you. Any further questions from the audience? Ewan?
If you were on the University Council, would you ever vote or support the university having links with either the fossil fuel industry or the arms industry? So that would be like things like investments, also kind of research partnerships, providing such like companies to raise fares, and like the extensive links that exist between the university and these two industries. Is there any case you can see if you support the university collaborating with the working with?
Let's start with Simon.
No, it's destroying our research. Cambridge money invested in fossil fuel companies is being used to pay public relations experts to undermine Cambridge University research. We are doing that. That is stupid beyond belief. It has to stop.
Thank you for that. Yes, no, and I will say that I'm very supportive of the divestment movement. That needs to happen as soon as possible. It is frustrating how long it's taking. We're waiting for the full report, which is in July, and I'm sure it will be an excellent report. And it is very frustrating, though, how long it's taking. And then the big question is, how quickly can we implement divestment, really?
No. Yeah, thanks for that question. I think it seems so obvious that we need to cut any kind of investment ties whatsoever with the fossil fuel industry. And I think those other things you mentioned are also really important, the ways in which not only fossil fuels, but also the arms industry is right at the heart of our institution in some sectors through funding research, turning up at careers fairs. That seems to me outrageous, and anything that we can do on the University Council to vote against that, I would be voting against that.
Okay, thanks. Unfortunately, we're going to have to wrap it up relatively soon, but I have one last question that a member sent in. So the theme of the day today is there's a focus on migrant staff and the university's complicity in the hostile environment. And so the question is really in what ways would you see yourself supporting migrant staff when you're on council?
Me first. Well, I guess this question hits very close to home, since I'm here on a Tier 2 visa. Thank you very much for that question. It's an important one. We do need, and especially because with Brexit, we're going to have a lot more staff on visas and in precarious situations. We need to find a way to support them. It comes back, well, there's several things. We have, for example, financial support. I will say that my most recent visa cost me, out of my own pocket, £1,800. I could not get that reimbursed at all. I had to pay that out of my personal money. And it's only gotten worse since then. That same visa would today cost me over $2,000. And my permanent residence will also. So that's a real big challenge for many people. I'm fortunate enough that I've saved money that I can afford that. But if I had children, a family, the cost can exceed $10,000. And there are numerous horror stories. So the university, at a personal level, has some programs and needs to further those programs to support the financial costs. But then also turning around and lobbying in central government to fix this problem, because it's a completely artificial problem. And we know that our migrant staff are very important. It's approximately 15 to 20%, I believe, of the postdocs, if I remember the statistics offhand. And we get people from all over the world who come here and give their talent. And we need to keep on encouraging that, or else we're all going to suffer. So there's the two-pronged approach.
Thanks for that question. Yes, it seems to me that this is, as we've heard, it's a problem that will become worse. It will become worse after Brexit. It's already bad in this institution. Asia Islam, in a case that has got a lot of coverage, has been placed in a terrible situation. And in that situation, it was tied, of course, to the casualisation crisis. But of course, you don't have to be casualised to suffer from this. Just today in the papers, Nazia Hussain, who's a permanent lecturer, is facing deportation or the threat of deportation for the same reasons as Asia Islam. So it seems to me this is a really urgent crisis. It's going to get worse. The university can offer financial support, as we've heard, visa fees plus dependents, national health contributions as well, which can be made for migrant staff. And yes, I think we just need to, as in so many things that we do as an institution, we need to do better at taking the argument out into the public. We're a very well-known institution. People listen to us. They want to hear us. We need to say this is an unacceptable situation. It's catastrophic for people's personal lives. It's catastrophic for our work as a teaching and resource organisation, and we just can't tolerate it.
I can only echo, the importance of this. The whole debate about migrants and immigration in this country has got so terrible, so alienating, so hateful, so spiteful, so divisive. And the university should be putting its whole institutional might into responding to that. It cannot leave it up to its well-meaning staff and students and campaigns. People will view that very differently. If the Vice-Chancellor or the Chancellor actually wants to stand up and get behind these people, it makes a very different public story. It makes a very different impact. It means that it gets read in a very different way. And I think for too long, there's this story that when you come to the UK, you go to your citizenship ceremony, and they tell you all about how wonderfully welcoming and tolerant the UK is, and it's a fucking lie. But it's allowed to persist because there are always those who are welcoming and tolerant and who will work. And I think everyone in this room is on that side. And that's really good, but it's not enough. We have to move the Overton window. We have to, make it clear to everyone that this isn't about being kind-hearted and lefty and progressive, that this is necessary and important and just and right for everyone. And I think, going back to what I said at the beginning, it's about the university accepting that it has that power, that it is an incredibly powerful institution, and if it wants to live up to that power, it can bring about change. But it's so easy for those who are high up in the university governance structure to feel worried and to feel defensive and to prefer to just leave it. Don't stir the pot, don't get too involved. Let the union, let the other people take it forward. I should probably stop there, but I do just want to say one other thing, which is we're very good at, we're very good. The university provides support and help with visas and relocation expenses for many staff, and that can be really important in helping migrants. We do also, of course, have a colonial legacy, which is very difficult for some migrants coming here. And I think, again, we need to realise that this is a very real problem for people, that people won't want to come to the university, or when they do come here, they'll feel left out or put off by that issue as well. It's not just a case of dealing with other people's problems. There are also problems that originate from inside this university that we should really be doing more of to help our immigrant staff as well.
Okay, thank you. Okay, so thank you very much for coming, everyone. I should also say, just so it's clear, we invited all 4 candidates today, and Phil, Simon, and Matthew kindly chose to attend and give their statements and answer questions from the audience. So thank you very much. Thank you for audience questions. Thank you for coming. Thanks.
Thank you for hosting.